I had been praying and meditating and saying, show me how to serve. Show me how to be an instrument of your peace, because that's what I really wanted. I wanted to experience that peace that I had glimpsed in the light. And I knew that it was possible here. At least it was possible to a greater extent than I was then experiencing it. I was given 4 principles in response to love. What do you most want me to know today? I heard be love. And I got these 4 principles. The first one is
You're listening to Shifting Dimensions, the podcast where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jumi Moses, spiritual seeker and metaphysical investigator, exploring the mysteries of existence. On the show today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Diane Haworth. Diane is a heart-centered success coach, speaker, author, TV host, and founder of the Be Love Principles, and she is passionate about helping others connect to their own inner wisdom and live a life of more love, joy, and peace. She also is the author of the book How to Choose Love When You Just Want to Slap Somebody. Diane, welcome to Shifting Dimensions. I'm so excited to have you here on the show.
oh, thank you so much for the invitation to come here. And I just want to say that I love the idea of this shifting perspectives and shifting dimensions and how we can look at what we think of as reality in different ways. So thanks. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig deeper into your Be Love principles because, as we were saying before we started the recording, I came across the principles, and I will always say that love is my religion. So when I came across your Be Love principles, I'm like, yes, I need to have her on the show. I need to talk about this. But before we jump into that, I want to learn a little bit more about you. You had a near-death experience in 1985 that had a profound effect on you. Can you talk about that experience and what it was like?
Yeah, thanks for asking. At the time, I was in my late 20s and I had done everything I thought I was supposed to do. I did the best to be a good student and a good daughter and a good wife and all that sort of thing, and a good potential mother. So I was pregnant with my first child and read all the books that were available at the time, thought I did everything right, and I found myself in a real serious medical condition. I ended up delivering my daughter 12 weeks early. And again, this is 40 years ago. She was 2 pounds, very critical. I couldn't even deliver in the hospital where I lived. I had to go 90 miles away. And in the course of that week where I was hospitalized and ultimately had to have an emergency C-section, I had my near-death experience. For me, and again, this is 1995, there was no internet. I come from a very small rural town in Virginia, about 50 miles outside of DC. Near-death experiences was not something you talked about at the coffee shop. They knew what it was. All I knew is I was very sick. I had something that at the time we called preeclampsia, which meant my kidneys were shutting down. It was very serious. And at the height of this issue where a medical team was trying to take care of me, all I remember is I'm outside of my body. I'm in this tunnel of light. I am suddenly not in pain anymore. I'd been in extreme pain and there was all kinds of tubes and needles and things going in me. I didn't feel any of that. I went from feeling terrified, scared for my baby, who was still in utero at that point, scared for me, knowing that I just wasn't thinking correctly. I go in this light and I end up at a place that it's very hard to put into words, but it was just this. I just felt surrounded with love and peace and comfort. There were no worries. There was no stress. There just was this acceptance and peace. And it really does go beyond what I can speak about. And I remember hearing, you can stay here. And I was like, great, I'll stay here, take care of the baby. And I heard, no, if you stay here, this is what's going to happen to the baby. And it was not what I wanted. And I just remember screaming, no. And just like that, I was back in my body, fully in pain, went ahead. Obviously, I had the child, and she's fine, by the way. But from that point, I was never, ever afraid to die because I realized that there is nothing but love and light and support. I just wasn't afraid anymore. Now, I want to be really honest. I'm not a big fan of suffering or physical pain. But as far as dying, that I could see so clearly that there was just a transition of consciousness. So from that perspective, I was never afraid of death again, ever.
You mentioned something that was very interesting. You said that at the time of this near death experience, nobody was really talking about near death experiences. Now it's so popular, it's, in mainstream media. Even those who are not interested in the space have heard about a near death experience. But at the time when you had yours, that was not something people were talking about. After having that experience and kind of being in a place where you were surrounded with so much love, so much care, so much acceptance, and then coming back into this physical plane, have you always kind of had a sense prior to dying that there was this like other world that was loving? Did you have any sort of like interest in the spiritual world? Did you have psychic abilities? Were you super religious? Who were you before the experience? And how did that change how you saw spirituality in the world that we live in?
That's a great question. I can say that I was always curious, and I always thought this, whatever this was, my life at the time, like, this could not be it. This could not be all there was. It just didn't make sense to me that the suffering, the fear, the stress, the overwhelm that most of us, right, experience from time to time in our lives, and some of us more consistently. It just didn't make sense to me when I would go to a traditional church and I would hear some of the stories about heaven and all of these kinds of things. There just was a disconnect. Now, I grew up in the 60s, and in the 70s, I would have been in high school and college, right? So it's hard to remember now where we are now in 2025. But back then, there was the Vietnam War was on TV. And that was before we had laws and processes that kind of modified what people saw on traditional TV. So I would see little kids my age dead, right? I would see these horrible things that I didn't understand. I was a kid when the Kennedys were shot, when Dr. King was shot. I didn't understand the world I lived in. So I can tell you that I desperately wanted to believe in a love that was bigger and something that united us all. I knew that. Some part of me knew that it didn't make any difference what country we lived in, what color we were, what church we went to, that we all wanted to be loved and we all wanted people, places, things to love. I did know that. But after those experiences, because I had in the hospital, I had that experience and I also had an angel experience, it shifted in that what I hoped was true, I now knew was true. I will say that nobody, it's certainly not my family and friends, they thought I was nuts, actually. When I tried to explain to them what had happened, I would get a lot of, you were on a lot of drugs, right? You were probably coming off of something or, you were really sick. So there was a feeling of isolation and this awareness that nobody could take care, that nobody could take away. That knowing was never in doubt. That was not in doubt. And that did change me.
I love what you said there. You went from hoping that certain things were true to knowing for sure that they were true. And also, I think it's interesting and also a little bit funny that your family were just like, well, you're on a lot of drugs. So are you
Yeah.
sure? But now I'm sure, I don't know if they've come around or again, because all near death experiences are so ubiquitous now. It's common for people talking about these things so people who again aren't typically interested in these type of topics are curious enough to be like, okay, I'll give someone an audience here. Okay. Now, I want to kind of shift a little bit and talk about your be love principles because at some point in your spiritual journey, you received a direct download of these be love principles.
Yeah.
What are they and how did you receive this download?
So this has really become the passion of my life. And I think that it's really interesting to note that before I got these principles, I had been meditating for many years. I'd been on the spiritual path. Sometimes it was traditional, sometimes it was alternative. I was exploring the mystics, all of which was not necessarily common in my family, right? But there was this pull from the soul, right? There was this beckoning that said, come on. And it was very different than fears and pushing that I now recognize would come from my ego. That was very fear based. You better do this. This was more of a, yeah, it's just this beautiful, soft beckoning to come more, to go deeper, learn more, explore more. So, in that light, I had been praying and meditating and saying, show me how to serve. Show me how to be an instrument of your peace because that's what I really wanted. I wanted to experience that peace that I had glimpsed in the light. And I knew that it was possible here. At least it was possible to a greater extent than I was then experiencing it. And in meditation, in a group setting, actually, I received these four principles and I received them in response to this question: Love, what do you most want me to know today? That's a question I had been using to journal with for years. Love, what do you most want me to know today? And love to me is the expansive, intelligent, creative energy that beats your heart and mind, that creates galaxies, that makes the tides come in and out. Some people call that God, universe, love. That that's what I was communing with. And in a meditation that created actually a little vignette, it was like a little story. I saw this visually, I heard it, I felt it, I saw it. I was given four principles in response to love. What do you most want me to know today? I heard be love. And I got these four principles. The first one is greet everyone with an open heart without an agenda. The second is see the divine essence in everyone and everything. The third, which is the one that usually people get a little hung up on, is forgive quickly, completely, and unconditionally. And the fourth was to remember you are the light. You never left the light of the all. So when I think back on that, I realize that my quest to understand love and to really embody the love that I know we all are, for me and my personality, I needed a little checklist. I've always been a checklist person, right? Let's do this. And what I now know is that this was a beautiful process that I can use. I use those principles individually and together as a process to help bring me back to the truth of who I know I am, you are, we all are. And that is to me the light of love.
You know, you said that you're someone who is a lover of checklists and you also call yourself a practical mystic. And I feel like these are practical principles and tools that anyone on a spiritual path, even if you're not on a spiritual path, you can reflect on and adopt. But I love these principles so much because they feel very complete to me. And I'm also thinking to myself too, is maybe you were able to channel this the way that you were able to channel it because of the near death experience and also the years of meditation, because these are so profound. And I want to kind of pick each of them apart, not pick them apart, that's not the word. I want to go in depth, line by line, and talk extensively about each principle because I think that they're important. because I think it's easy to say these things, but everybody has their own interpretation. So I want to get deeper into your interpretation of these principles. And I also want to read a quote that I pulled from your website where you said, I learned how to be good, how to be nice, how to be quiet, but I never learned how to be love. And it's very interesting because I recently finished reading a book by Bell Hooks called All About Love. And in her book, she talks about how we're not taught to love, and the things we consider love are, in fact, not love. So, again, everything happens for a reason. And I think we're having this conversation for a reason as well. So, starting with love principle one, greet everyone with an open heart without an agenda. The part that gets me going is the without an agenda part because we're taught in the society, maybe not explicitly, to make relationships and make connections so we can get things out of people. But here you're saying that we should not be leading with that. So, can we talk about that principle a little bit?
Yeah, and I really appreciate the way that you've spoken about it. The principles and my understanding of the principles has unfolded over the years as I've used them. So one of the things that I love about them when I teach these from the stage in a presentation, when I teach them in a class or I'm using them with individual clients, I am always amazed by how dynamic they are and how they unfold for different people. So while I'm happy to share how it's worked for me and my clients, I really invite everyone to be open to how it will unfold for them. Now, this one in particular, this is not the way I talk. So it's not like I would not use the word agenda in that way. So that was one of the things that really helped me understand that this came through me, not from me. And as you mentioned, we now have evidence, scientific evidence that shows that when people have gone through near death experiences, and if they've meditated for many years, there are changes that occur in the brain. I do not recommend a near death experience, by the way, but I'm just saying that is one of the things that can happen. In this one, what I was guided to do, because when I first got these principles, I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what this meant. To be honest with you, I had mentioned I was in a group setting. I thought someone had literally spiked my coffee. That is how unusual the event was. But then when I saw how profound they were, I went inside in meditation and through journaling said, what do I do with these? And I was told to practice them one at a time for at least a week so I could get a feeling for it. So, for example, for the first week, my goal was to, in my regular day, right? How am I going to silently greet the postman with an open heart without an agenda? Because I had an agenda. If I see the post guy, I expect my mail. My mail. What about driving? Like you and I are in the DC area, right? How am I going to be on the Beltway without an agenda, without having any preconceived notions about the drivers around me or the people in the grocery store or my clients or vendors that I'm working with? So that was a real beautiful understanding of the intention to come to every interaction free and clear as much as I could. How could I greet you? This is the first time I ever met you. How could I greet you without any preconceived notions or judgments or just how could I experience you? How could I just let love be speaking to love? How could I do that? That was what I did in that first thing. And it took me actually a couple years, I think it was a couple years, before I realized the most important thing to do was for me to first learn how to greet myself without an agenda. So, one of the things I have my clients do, and this is actually tough for lots of folks, is when they get up in the morning, look at themselves in the mirror without wrinkles, without your story of what you did or didn't do yesterday, or what you're supposed to do tomorrow, or what your heritage is, or what your bank account is. Just how can you greet yourself with an open heart, without any filters, without any judgments? And just this right there, Jimmy, that is life changing. When you can see yourself without those judgments, then you can start to see other people that way. And you see so much more beauty in the world, so much more compassion and love and collaboration that you did not realize your filters were hampering. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And, I really resonated with this principle to begin with, but I'm resonating with it more as you're speaking about it because I am the type of person, but I think obviously some societal programming has kind of clouded how I approach things. I always had this instinct to approach people without an agenda. And I used to think I was weird, right? Because especially in the corporate world, for example, people are always talking about networking, people are always talking about making connections or, you know, conversating with people that can get you to the next level or you can get something from. And I used to just kind of feel like I struggle with networking because when I'm talking to someone, I genuinely want to learn about them. And I'm not necessarily looking for this conversation to lead to us connecting and them referring me for a job. If it comes out of that conversation, great, but that's not my agenda. So I used to feel like, oh, is that weird? Is that why I'm not achieving certain things right now? Because I'm, not looking through the lens of an agenda. So I love how you broke that down. And the part that just opened my heart a little bit more is that when we think about these things, we don't think about ourselves as well. So when you said that it's also important for us to approach ourselves without an agenda, especially first thing in the morning, I'm like, yes, this makes so much sense. And it's so freeing, right? It kind of reminds me of this thing I came across on TikTok where it was like more people need to give themselves permission to be unattractive. Meaning, like, not worrying about what they look like. Of course, you don't wanna go out looking rough per se, but you don't need to put this pressure on yourself to be this person, to show up a certain way, to have this agenda of who you're supposed to be. And again, I don't think we're saying there's anything wrong with having an agenda because sometimes you do. You go to your teacher and you want a better grade, so you have an agenda through that conversation, but you're just talking about in everyday life in most of our interactions. Yeah, that's awesome.
You know, you said so many really insightful things, and I just want to make sure you realize how brilliant some of these were. When you were talking about networking without an agenda, what I heard was without attachment. That is what the essence of love is. We are so used to saying, right, I love this book, I love my slippers, I love spaghetti, I love this person. Real, true love is not attached to an image or an understanding or what I can get out of you. It simply is. And that, my friend, is what you were talking about.
Brilliant.
Networking just as one soul meeting another soul.
Thank you. Oh, wow. This is amazing. I'm conducting the interview right now, but I can't wait to go back and listen to this. Okay. Let's move on to Be Love principle number 2 because
Mhm.
we can talk about each principle for an hour each, right?
Yeah, we
But
could.
of course, we're going to move through this a little bit quicker so that people can get like a pretty substantial understanding of these principles. But then, of course, you know, look into your work more extensively if they want more information. Okay. So, number 2, see the divine essence in everyone and everything. What does that mean?
My dear friend, you just gave me a great setup for that. When we're going out and we fix our hair and we do our makeup and, we want to be presentable, like we both were right before we meet here, of course. What I what I now understand is where is that coming from? Is it coming from fear of being judged? Is it coming from society expectations? Or is it coming from just a joyful spirit that just wants to do this? That number 2, see the divine essence is literally when love is responding to love. And we do this in places and times that we don't expect it. One of my favorite examples is when people go out and they encounter a kitten or a puppy. Right. There's no expectation. There's just this joyful little creature, this little bundle of curiosity and energy. And you just respond to that with, oh, look how cute that is. That's love responding to love. When we can greet each other that way, it's, in yoga, people will often say namaste, right? The divine in me sees and honors the divine in you. That is a wonderful thing to say. But when we can embody that as best we can as humans, because we are humans, at least most of us, right? We are humans. That's another podcast we could do. But that honoring the divine within, even when there's conflict about you want to do this and I want to do that, whatever it is, we can deal with those very human conflicts if we can honor the divinity in ourselves and in others. So when we get to this second principle, and if I'm having people practice this right for a week, I will often tell them to go out in nature first. They don't have any problem seeing the divine in a budding flower or in a beautiful tree or in a body of water. And once you can attune to that, you can see past the behavior of others and you can start to recognize that divine spark. Now, I want to say this doesn't mean we deny behavior that needs to be checked. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is every single person who is here, who's ever been here, who will ever be here, comes from that divine source, that source that I visited right when I was in the near death experience. We can recognize that and from that understanding, deal with whatever, the situation is that we have to come up with. I'm a grandmother now. And when I see my grandkids, I have two grandsons. I mean, they're kids. So sometimes they have fits and do things kids do. I can observe that and recognize they are having a very real a reaction to whatever they're interpreting in their world. But my love for them never wavers. It never wavers. And when we can do that with ourselves and each other, that's when we change this world. That's when we really get to inhabit the collaborative, compassionate, beautiful world that we all know is here, but we
A-
don't often get to experience it.
Absolutely. And you said this as you were kind of breaking down this principle, but when you started talking about it and when I read this, just reminded me about this like principle of all of us being interconnected with one another, not being separate from nature, not being separate from each other. And seeing that divine spark is a mirror to your divine spark, right? Because as human beings, we're not perfect. We're nowhere close to being perfect. And it would be amazing to know that on our worst day, someone can still look at us fondly with love, but also, you know, like you said, there is a mix of you can lovingly see someone but still hold them accountable. And
Right.
accountability is also a form of love, but you don't have to hate them in order to enforce accountability or justice. And there's a freedom that comes with that. There's a healing that happens on an energetic level between you and the other person or you and the other, being, animal, etc. Love that principle. Okay, so number 3. And I saw this one and I said, "Oh, people are going
Yeah.
to push back on this one for
Yeah, they do.
sure."
They do.
So let's talk about it. Forgive quickly. This is principle number 3 for those
Yep.
listening. Forgive quickly, completely, and unconditionally. What does that mean?
Well, I didn't know at first. I mean, I was like, what? I will always say, if I could go to a big box store and get a giant bottle of forgiveness pills, I'd be the first one in line. Let's just pop some because that's really difficult. Or I should say, we think that's really difficult. I am a student of A Course in Miracles, and the entire book is about forgiveness, right? The difference between love and fear, and the door between the two being forgiveness. This was one that when I looked at it separately, right? I went through my week of I'm going to forgive everybody. unconditionally, all this kind of stuff. I was like, how do I do this? What in the heck is happening here? What I found was even having the intention to forgive shifted something, shifted my reality, shifted my perspective. Even if I didn't know how, it was, wait a minute, I see that I am holding on to a resentment. I am holding on to a regret. I am holding on to anger or stress. And we all know who suffers, right? You're the one holding on to that energy. You're the one that suffers. Just having a willingness to say, show me how to do this. I found there were certain things that literally just shifted like almost on their own. That to me, that's from grace of spirit. But of course, the biggest forgiveness opportunities was forgiving myself for what I saw as mistakes or stupid decisions or all the human things that we do. What I also realized, because a lot of people would say to me, well, such and such happened and it was 10 years ago. How can I do this quickly? There is no space and time in the universe, right? If you are still holding on to a resentment or a fear, the time to release that is now. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this one in particular is that once I started putting these together, and I would have people, actually, this is what I do with my clients now. I will have them find what I call a focus person or a focus event. And I'll have them judge it from 1 to 10, like how much distress does it give them? And then we'll take that focus person or event. I will take them to the first principle. How can you greet this person with an open heart without an agenda? And you don't even have to know how, you just have to be willing and ask the question. Everything that happens is internal to you. And then if we go, how could you greet this person, event, whatever your focus person is, right? How could you see the divine essence in them? Then what happens is by the time they get to the third principle, something has shifted. I had an energy worker, a pretty famous energy worker actually, that I worked through this process that was holding some hard feelings about an event that had occurred. And they said to me, oh my goodness, I have worked with this, done all the work around it, but not until I brought it to the be love principles did I see the other person's perspective. And it was only then that I could realize, of course, they reacted in the only way they knew how. They didn't mean to hurt me. And then forgiveness was much easier for them. Now, I will tell people always that you don't have to forgive anything. You really don't. And if you're willing, what you can always do is say, show me what it would feel like to be open to forgiveness. Just cracking that door, right? Because a lot of people just don't know what that's like, especially if they've been in an extreme abusive situation. It's human nature to think holding on to a resentment offers you some kind of protection. And often the person that they're upset with or they need to be protected, they could be dead for decades. There is no real danger, but the energy of the trauma is there. And to my experience is love and forgiveness is what unlocks that part of the heart and allows you to experience life at a different level. And to me, that key is forgiveness. So I can't tell you this is the most popular principle, but I can tell you that this is one that really is transformation. It just transforms people's lives. It really does.
Yeah, I can tell this is definitely the most transformational beloved principle because when you think about it, anyone listening to this, when you find yourself forgiving someone you thought you would never forgive, it's almost kind of like you shifted into a new paradigm, right? It's a
Absolutely.
complete shift, but it's also understandable that a lot of times people hold on to resentment and anger and frustration because in many ways that's a version of holding someone accountable because I think a lot of people feel like, well, if I forgive, right? If I'm at peace with this, then does that mean this person gets away scot free for how they've hurt me? can I enforce any sort of justice? Because, for example, someone who's been abused, someone who had all of their expensive items stolen, for example, they forgive the robber and they might feel like if I do that, then I'm not going to be pressed to take action to go to the police department or a police station, I should say, and ask that the person be reprimanded. So, what would you say to people who are afraid that them releasing this forgiveness could lead to non accountability for the perpetrator who really hurt them?
So that is a great question. I get it all the time. And when I'm working with groups and we're doing this as a process, one of the things that I remind people is this does not condone behavior. This does not excuse behavior. What forgiveness does is release you from the energy of resentment, stress, fear. If someone has done something that requires legal action, go right ahead. Go call whoever you need to call your attorney, call the police. This is a completely different thing. There's beautiful stories, and I wish had the people's names, but I know there's a beautiful story that I think was made into a movie where a woman whose son had been killed became friends with the man that murdered her son. And she would visit him on death row and was there when he passed, but not in a way that was resentful, but was in this forgiving way that released her. And she could see, not condone the behavior, but she could see what led to his behavior. This is really about your peace and your, yeah, freedom. And it doesn't mean legally taking action is in any way prohibited. It's not at all. This is where I'm so glad you brought this up because people think that love is wishy washy and nobody has to do anything. No, love is fierce. Love is fierce. Love is powerful. And love can hold the understanding that a divine being in their human form has made a mistake they need to be accountable for. Does that
I
make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and I actually want to read an excerpt from the All About Love book I was talking about earlier. Give me one moment. I'm just going to grab it. I'll be right back.
Mm.
Okay, I'm back. The reason I want to read this excerpt is because I think it really drives home the point that you're making here, and this is from the book All About Love by Bell Hooks. So there's actually two passages here. I hope I can quickly find them. So she talks about the different components to love, right? And she says, to truly love, we must learn to mix various ingredients: care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, justice, and trust. And the justice part, at first, I thought, wow, that's very interesting. I don't see a lot of people talk about justice as it pertains to love, right? Because I think justice is this separate thing, and I think people talk about justice from a place of, well, I'm angry with you, you hurt me, and justice is like burning you at the stake. But love can also embody justice. And with what you were talking about that woman who became friends with the man who killed her son. And I've seen a couple of stories of parents who've lost a child to someone killing them, becoming friends with that person. And another excerpt that I actually took on my phone that I'm going to bring up really quickly that kind of talks about that. And I want to highlight it says that, and this is from M. Scott Peck.
Oh, yeah.
He defines love as the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And this principle, I feel like, resonates so well. All of the principles resonate with that particular definition, but especially this principle because I feel like when we engage in the act of forgiveness, we are growing spiritually. And when we offer forgiveness to someone, we are aiding in their own spiritual growth. And the justice piece, holding them accountable, sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is hold them accountable to their actions so they can grow from that experience.
Yeah, but remember, we've got two versions there. We've got love at work in the world,
Yes.
which is where the justice piece comes in. And when I think of love and justice, I have to think of the King Center and the wonderful work of Dr. Martin Luther King. He's the one that said, you can dislike what someone does, but you love them. You never attack the person, you attack the action. And I don't mean attack, but you question the action, however that works. So that's how love is in action in the world. From my experience, the divine love just is. It's the love that I experienced when I was had the near death experience. It just is. But in this incarnation, justice is something that as humans we look for. And if we can do that from a place of love, this aligned place, that's where we have more lasting change, I think. So I really appreciate you sharing all that.
Thank you. Okay. Number 4,
Yeah.
and this is the last love principle. And I'm sure, with these principles, they could be broken down even further and further, but these are just high level, of course. So, number 4, remember you are the light. You never left the light of the all. What does that mean?
So when this part of my vision occurred, when I received these, I was shown a light. Now, it was very different than that soft, encompassing, loving light that I had in the near death experience. This light was vibrant and teeming and joyful. And what I immediately realized was that this is who we are, this life force, this consciousness in human form. This is who we are. And we really never left. When you look at mystic studies, you will often hear them talking about light, the light of love. Actually, that's my tagline, live from the light of love, which I didn't even know what that meant when I got it, by the way. But I started using it. Light is about knowledge, right? And if you think about it, everybody's got one of these. And how does this work? Some little signal of light bounces off a satellite somewhere, and all of a sudden I get all this information. We are that light. And when I work people through the principles, especially when we work in somebody through a forgiveness opportunity, what I'll invite them to do is imagine they are in a spotlight of this beautiful teeming gold light, and let the spotlight be about 10 or 20 feet around them. And I'll have them embody it, and I'll have them feel what it feels like to be light sitting in light. And then, if they're interested and willing, I'll have them invite a symbol or a person, whatever that focus person was, into this light with them. And that's when the tears start. That's when they recognize that we are all the same. We are all light beings from this one source. And that's when a lot of that forgiveness stuff really unfolds at a different level. And again, doesn't mean you don't hold someone accountable, but it is a much different experience to be able to embody love and understand that everybody, it's just like Maya Angelou said, everybody's doing the best they can with what they got. And when they know better, they do better. But when you can not only forgive others, but the biggest forgiveness opportunities are always for yourself, always for yourself. And to remember you really are light sitting in light. I do want to share one thing. Often, people will say to me, well, if we're all light, why is everything so screwed up? Okay. We do live in a world of duality. The Course in Miracles talks about this, as does many mystical texts. And I want you to think about this. If you have a flashlight, which is what you and I are both, right? We're little beacons of light, and you take it outside in the middle of the day, it's on, but you don't see a lot. But when you take that light into the darkness, that's when you see the contrast. That's when you can really remember, I am this light. And my invitation from love is to shine even in this dark situation. My invitation is to forgive. My invitation is to see people really who they are, the essence of who they are, that's when we have this beautiful unfolding of the soul at a different level. And that's why this light thing is so important. It's really, I would say it's my favorite, but they're all my favorite. But,
Yeah, and they all tie into each other so perfectly. They
which
just
is
like
another reason why I didn't make it up
yeah,
because I can't do this. I can't
like
do
from
this.
number 1, it builds into number 2 and number 1 and 2 build into number 3 and then number 4 wraps everything up so nicely and kind of reinforces the lessons from number 3, 2, and 1 if you really think about it, right? Again, these are just so powerful and the piece about seeing the divine essence in everyone, right? Number 2 and number 3, forgiving quickly and completely and unconditionally. The more you see the divine essence in yourself and you forgive yourself, the more you're able to have compassion and forgive others. And again, this always happens to me where I will experience something in my life that ties up really or ties in really nicely with the conversation I'm going to have with a guest. And recently, there was someone in my life that if there was anyone that I was holding a grudge with, not ready to forgive them, didn't care for them, didn't really wish them bad, but genuinely did not care for them. There was still resentment, discomfort around them. For some reason, over the last couple of days, they kept popping up in my head. And there was just this pull and push in my spirit to send them a voice note, wishing them a good week, wishing them a good day, sending love to them. Because to your point, it's like when you start this, when you're on this spiritual path where love is your religion, I use that word loosely, love is your guiding principle, you quickly realize that, or at least let me speak for myself, I'm quickly able to see that, you know, hurt people, right? Again, it's not an excuse, but you understand that, like, for someone to be so volatile, they're volatile on the inside. Because when I think about myself, when I'm happy, I don't have time to make anybody else's life miserable. But when I'm unhappy, when I'm frustrated, there's more of a push, maybe not intentionally, to put that anger and frustration, that negative energy out into the world and, give it to other people. So there's so much there. And you mentioned something about the fact that, how can we love and see the light in everything when the world is a mess? So I would have to ask you this question, like, why do you think these love principles are important at this time?
Well, I think that anybody that's listening to this show, right? And certainly that we are in unprecedented times. I don't care if you look at astrology, if you look at politics, this is the opportunity for us all to contribute to the world that we want to live in. And I think that these came to me now, first of all, is because I needed them, because my desire really was, how can I be loved in the world? And it was like, here you go. And I realized that for each of us to get whatever it is we need, we're here to share that with others. We're here to share it with others. So this is just one way, not the only way, but it is one way for each of us individually to come into a place of more love, more peace, more clarity, more understanding. And just like you said, when you are in that place of more peace and clarity, what do you project out into the world? How productive are you in the world? How do you treat other people? Right? That it's just that ripple effect. And this is, if somebody goes to the website and looks at these references, they'll see that we actually did a case study on this. And over 3 months, people, I have it documented, people had more clarity. They felt more connected to love. They had greater relationships. They had greater senses of self love by concentrating on these principles. So I know they work. And again, they're not the only tool, but I know they are a tool that helps people transform so they can be that shining light they're here to be. And if you're on the planet right now, you're here to shine. You are
Mm.
here to shine.
Speaking about what you just said about the rippling effect, I think sometimes when we look at all the stuff that's happening in the world, we look at it from a macro level, like how can
Mhm.
we solve all these issues? And people get overwhelmed because they're like, they feel helpless, right? What can I do as an individual to stop the wars that are happening?
Yeah.
Not much. But in fact, we can do a lot. And it starts from the micro level, right? And I think these principles are super effective for anyone who's trying to radically change their life, their energetic resonance. And like you said, it becomes a domino effect, it becomes a ripple effect, right? Where it's like you are embodying love, you're spreading love. The person you spread love to will spread it to the next person they come across. And that ends up reverberating to the masses, right? On a macro level. So it's just really important. And I think it's very spot on at this time that we're living now because people genuinely don't know what it means to be in love, to be love, right? Because love is an action. It's not a feeling. We all think it's a feeling, but it genuinely is an action. It's how we show up for ourselves and for others. I have to ask, are these principles tied to karma in any way? Because sometimes people have these guiding principles and I guess one of the effects from it would be to help people clear out their karma, quote unquote, and, not be in situations where they have to continue to repeat karmic cycles. So, for example, with number three, forgiving, it's if you don't forgive, there's this notion of coming back into another lifetime where you have to act it out again until you let it go. So, I'm just curious, do you tie these principles to any sort of karmic principles as well?
That's a great question. I can't say that I do specifically, but when I look at patterns of behavior, and when you are a coach or you work in therapy or you just look at people in your life, right? You can see how resentments can be handed down to generations, right? Oh, we're not supposed to like those people. So we don't like those people. Why not? Well, because people in my family don't do that. So from that kind of a karmic generational thing, yeah, anytime any of us chooses as best we can, day to day, moment by moment, to choose love, I think that it interrupts the pattern of hate and ignorance and misinformation. I will tell you this, it takes courage because this is not something that you hear on the news. Yeah, everybody's going to stand up for love. Okay. And there are millions of people every second of every day that are choosing to do this. They don't make the news, but it's always comforting to me to realize literally any second of the day or night, there are people that you will never meet praying for you and your health and your happiness and your abundance. Every second of the day, that's the energy that we are tapping into and we're amplifying. And if that breaks karmic cycles for not only generations, but for countries, then I'm all for then I'm all for it.
Me too. This has been a great conversation. And like I said, we scratched the surface as best as we could. And I'm going to sit with these principles myself. I can't wait to go back and listen to this episode because I do think these principles will definitely shift people if they are able to implement it into their lives. Speaking of shifts, I have to ask you one last question, and I ask this to all my guests on the show, and that is, have you shifted in perspective on anything recently? Since the show is called Shifting Dimensions, and it could be as lighthearted or as deep as you would like it to be.
Yeah, I shift all the time. And one of the things that I shifted on recently was questioning where some of my thoughts come from. So I'm somebody who just I always joke that I got six guys running around in my head asking different questions. And I will, when I have a thought, which, I do, and it could be judgmental, it could be anything, I will now say, who's thinking that? And is it the I am capital I, capital A, capital M, or is it the little I am? Is it the soul self or is it my collective understanding and experience and training and all of this stuff. I think of it as here's the truth, right? Here's my experiences, what I think I've learned, what I heard from childhood, what I've inherited. And here's a little ego that sits on top of it. And my shift has come from recognizing how much of my thoughts come from these layers, and they're not the truth. They're not the truth. That's been really eye opening.
Beautiful shift. Thank you so much, Diane. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your principles or work with you?
Oh, I really appreciate this. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm happy to share the website, but I also want to say thank you
Mm.
for shining your light. It is not easy to put these podcasts together, and it takes a lot of love and dedication. So I just want to honor and thank you for that.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Anyone that wants to know more about the Be Love principles, and there's meditations and free resources there. You can go to beloveprinciples.org, and you can find all kinds of stuff on what's going on with me at more from Diane, and that's Diane with one N.com, morefromdiane.com. And again, thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you as well. And I'm going to put both of those links in the show notes. Guys, just a friendly reminder that if you are enjoying the show, please make sure you subscribe, make sure you rate, leave a review, engage with us. Honestly, your engagement, your subscriptions, you sharing helps to bring visibility to the show. And if you're enjoying it, please show the show some love. And if you want to continue to rock with us, you can follow us on TikTok at Shifting Dimensions 444, or you can follow our YouTube page, or subscribe, I should say, to our YouTube page at Shifting Dimensions. You can find us there. Thank you again for tuning in. See you next time.